So just after four minutes later than the announced schedule of the broadcast, this one, the Khoodeelaar television channel, being broadcast only on the internet from London in the UK. So it's coming at 22:54 hours GMT, that is the equivalent to the British Standard Time, 10:54 p.m. on Monday, the 13th of December 2021. This is the title that we call bribing, daily bribing Boris Graf. From today onwards, we change that from the daily bribing Boris Johnson Graf to daily buying Boris Johnson Graf. And trailed on page 1, on the left side column, under inside, is a piece byline to Nick Timothy. And Nick Timothy's piece, as in this trailer, is called "The Tories Risk Being Branded the Selfish Party." It's not obvious from anything that I have seen where Nick Timothy had been, say, 18 years ago, 19 years ago, when Theresa May, yet to be a member of parliament, launched herself by presenting herself as not a nasty party supporter, but she was doing the confession that the Conservative Party had become known as the nasty party. Now, when she became Prime Minister, just after the dodgy, corrupt David Cameron staged the resignation, Theresa May had two kind of very close advisors. One was Nick Timothy and another was a female. The two of them were often referred to as Theresa May's kind of bulldogs. Not as fierce as later Dominic Cummings became known for his role in relation to Boris Johnson. But Nick Timothy was, in all senses, treated and regarded as the nasty personification of nastiness of Prime Minister Theresa May. Now, 2 days ago, Fleet Street papers have begun circulating the word that Theresa May is plotting revenge on Boris Johnson for the way he engineered her ouster from the post of leader of the Conservative Party and therefore the office of Prime Minister. So although Nick Timothy, who has a column on the daily buying Boris Johnson graph, is not directly kind of linked with Theresa May as such, it is contextually my view, evidentially my view, that he is very much part of the team Theresa May. And it is not a coincidence that about the same time when Fleet Street titles, all of them are conservative supporters, nonetheless, spreading the rumor or spreading the word that Theresa May is one of the plotters against Boris Johnson. That Nick Timothy, whom I called sick Timothy because of his various racist and stupid views, is surfacing with a kind of reworked version of the phrase nasty party, which he is calling now selfish party, which will have a ring, which will have a resonance with the people who are working now with Theresa May to depose Boris Johnson. Of course, Theresa May is not likely to replace him, but the discrediting of Boris Johnson is very much part of the agenda. And the personification and the personalization of the selfish party in Boris Johnson is part of the narrative. And this is where the line is going now. And there is a piece in the same issue of the Daily Buying Boris Johnson graph by Tim Stanley. Now, Tim Stanley has been a long-running kind of columnist and has had a platform on the Daily Buying Boris Johnson graph. Now, Stanley is a regular, or among the regular appearees on the Sky News and the BBC News Channel newspaper so-called review. What we are doing is world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. That is not what Tim Stanley has ever done. But this is our world exclusive diagnosis, is not only what he doesn't do, but what he appears to be about, doing things like commenting on the headlines, front pages, and dropping his biased opinion. Now, Tim Stanley is not as kind of brazen in his kind of style as Sick Timothy. But Tim Stanley and Timothy very much belong with the right wing. And Tim Stanley has the pretension that he is a liberal, he is a moderate, but he's not. He's actually supporter of the same ideology that Sikh Timothy supports, which Theresa May also supports, but Theresa May had a kind of surface which didn't come across as a nasty surface, but she was as nasty, and as was revealed after she left the Home Office, that during her tenure as the Home Secretary, all of which was spent during Dirty Dave Cameron in the post as Prime Minister, Theresa May, quote, talked about, although it was initially claimed that she actually had dictated, but she talked about creating a hostile environment for migrants and others like the Windrush people. And the fact that she had talked about creating that hostile environment has been kind of updated in the pieces written by Amelia Gentleman in The Guardian, who was given a few years ago, maybe 2017, the award called Paul Foot Award for her investigation published in The Guardian into the treatment of the Windrush generation of people by the UK Home Office. Now, Amelia Gentleman is writing a column in The Guardian, and she's an employee, I think, at The Guardian, but she's not a member of the Labour Party or a supporter of the Labour Party, I don't think. And Amelia Gentleman is married to one of Boris Johnson's brothers, Joe Johnson, who was a minister and an MP, and Joe Johnson actually staged a kind of rebuff against the overdoing Brexit by Boris Johnson. And he started resigning from various posts. Now, here is the Sikh Timothy piece calling the Conservatives risking being the selfish party. Well, it says the reputation of the selfish party spells electoral doom for the Tories. Now, as we have been saying, the political murderer of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has been complicit with Boris Johnson's various lies. And it is probably Keir Starmer's expectation that if he comes across sufficiently resembling the Tories, resembling Boris Johnson and being as right-wing as Johnson, then the Little Englanders, whom he kind of appeases to as the Patriots, might give him the chance to enter number 10 Downing Street. That is his expectation. All of this can, of course, change by things that cannot be foreseen by looking at the current kind of evidence. But that's his game plan, that he wants to use the notion and the concept of patriotism and be draped in the racist version of the British flag so that he becomes replacement for the Conservatives. Now, we'll come to Sikh Timothy later. Here is Tim Stanley pretending to be an internationally aware kind of observer of things like the behavior of Jussie Smollett, who was found guilty last week of filing a fake police report. Now, Smollett, as I've said in the last few days, has staged during the period in the White House of Donald Trump a kind of updater stunt that had been originally associated with the late 1980s African-American black teenager, Tawana Brawley. Now, Tawana Brawley had said that a gang of white man raped her and abused her in other ways, which I shall not be describing on this broadcast. And of course, the Toana Brolly allegations are still lingering because her supporters said that she was raped and abused. But she was not supported in the successful prosecution or conviction of any of her alleged rapists, white rapists, and racists. Now, what Smollett, African American Smollett, claimed was dismissed later and has now been dismissed as a publicity search for publicity. And according to Tim Stanley, quoting a police person, Smollett only got caught by the fact that when he eventually returned to his flat, he had the sandwich in his hand. Now, what is the importance, significance of the sandwich? Because according to the policeman, ex-superintendent Eddie Johnson, Smollett comes back and gets attacked in a hate crime. And during all this scuffle, they poured bleach on him and all of this. When he got up and went into his apartment building, he still had that sandwich with him. And according to Johnson, Eddie Johnson, that doesn't happen. That is to say, it's too improbable and too kind of unbelievable. So the police doubted Smollett, but the media and politicians initially backed him, says Tim Stanley, including a naive young president called Donald Trump. He called the alleged attack horrible. Yet it was obviously made up, farcically so. So why didn't people of intelligence, in an age that is supposedly riddled with skepticism, say it as they saw it? So Tim Stanley gives the explanation as to why the intelligence, people possessing the intelligence, stayed quiet. He says, because the cult of victimhood blinds, perhaps, but also because the economics favor keeping stum. Speak out before the facts have become a consensus, and you risk ostracism and unemployment. This has become an age of living dangerously. Better to lock your thoughts down and live as quietly as one can. Now, there, Tim Stanley is himself evading telling the truth himself because he's avoiding the fact, except in the description. In a comment aspect of his column, he's avoiding dismissingly referring to those victims who accuse racist attackers of victimizing them. Now, this is Tim Stanley is in contrast with Peter Hitchens in the Sunday Times, Sunday Mail on Sunday, and also a columnist, an Indian named columnist in the Telegraph, where this is the Indian named columnist in the Telegraph, who has interviewed this Jordan Peterson about cancel culture. And Peterson is an academic who has been featuring as the hero of the racist brigade. The racist brigade questioned any opposition to empires, slavery, and so on. And to place Dia Chakravarti is a woman, a right-wing woman, very much morally corrupt and opportunistic. She was born in Silot, where I come from, but that's all there is in terms of what I have in common with her. Dia Chakravarti has got a Hindu parent and a Muslim mother, but she has been promoted through the mainstream media as a right-wing kind of version, right-wing female version of Tim Stanley. She has been appearing on various channels, allegedly opining on the media, the reviewer of the press, etc., etc. But she's not honest and she's not credible. That is probably the reason why she's been given platforms by the right wing, because it serves two purposes. One is that she is a person of Asian, well, the name Chakravarti is Hindu rather than Muslim, so there is no danger of her being kind of treated as a Muslim, because the daily buying Boris Graf would not want to be associating itself with giving a platform to any quote Muslim, no matter how universal that Muslim may be. And daily buying Boris Johnson Graf has had and doesn't have at the present time, or hasn't had any for the last decade or so, an Indian, another Bengali Hindu called Mihir Bose. Now, Mihir Bose, although he grew up in Bombay, claims that he is related to Netaji Subhash Bose. Now, Subhash Bose was the most publicly known, identified opponent of the British Empire during the last 2-3 decades of the Raj. And Subhash Bose is still regarded as the leader of the subcontinent as the united country after the British would leave. And Subhash Bose had Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, and people of other backgrounds in his army that he was setting up against the British. So Subhash Bose was very much the most kind of popular leader of the subcontinent's people against the empire of all backgrounds, who was sabotaged and probably assassinated with the colluders, who included the Hindu kind of majority groups in India. Because the Hindu nationalists and Hindu RSS, that is now the main fascist kind of parent organization of the current BJP, which is fronted by Narendra Modi. Why am I talking about all of that? Because Mihir Bose was a liar, and he wrote, as far as I can remember, he wrote at least 20 to 30 separate pieces in the Telegraph in the 1970s, 1980s, whenever he was there, attacking the Bangladeshis. Remember what I'm saying? So the internet, the archive of the Telegraph on the internet, I have searched, not incessantly, but I have searched a few times, and I could not find any of those articles. So they can only be found in the print hard copy archive of the Telegraph, wherever that can be accessed, either in the British Library or in a private collection. I collected almost all the ones that I could access. And where is or are my collections? Is my collection? The answer is I have had to move location more times than I can remember or I can recount. So this minute I cannot say where those items were. So why am I talking about Dia Chakravarti and Mihir Bose? Because Mihir Bose published, as I say, 20 to 30 pieces that I identified against the Silotes. Now the Silotes were attacked in December 1973, 2nd of December 1973, by the Sunday Times Color magazine, which published a piece by a racist, idiotic woman called Leslie Garner. Leslie Garner resurfaced. The fact that she was idiotic and anti-Muslim and anti-Siloti personally, in addition to her anti-Siloti sources in the original piece in the Sunday Times published on the 2nd of December 1973, the fact that Leslie Garner herself, was an anti-Siloti, anti-Muslim racist idiot, she proved that. She proved that when she surfaced again and supported Monica Ali. Now 73, 83, 93, 2003, after 2003. And what Leslie Garner did was to write a couple of pieces, and made a couple of speeches in support of Monica Ali, but she had no idea that her surfacing in support of Monica Ali actually proved the fact that there was a malicious agenda to demonize, to slander, to undermine the Siloti population in the UK. Because in the entire history of writing fiction, if you like, there is not one occasion when an actual community has been given the title of the so-called fiction, and an entirely fictitious, defamatory, intentionally defamatory, anti-Muslim hatchet job has been done, which is what Monica Ali did. The other thing is that Monica Ali was an unheard of person. She was not a Bangladeshi. Although her mother is white, British or Irish, her father is a Bengali, not from Silot. Long distance away from Silot. And yet, the American publishing criminals paid Monica Ali in advance hundreds of thousands of pounds, well before she wrote even a single piece, single page or single word. So they funded this attack, organized attack on the Silotes by Monica Ali. Remember, that was a few decades since Leslie Garner had done the piece in the Sunday Times against the Silotes. Now, why have there been so many Fleet Street attempts to attack, insult, misrepresent, abuse, and distort the identity of the Siloti-speaking people in the UK? Why? There must be a reason. Of course, they don't go into the reasons, because if they gave the reason, that would be giving away. But what they have done, Leslie Garner, Mihir Bose, and Monica Ali. Now, these are not the only people that have done that. In the 1980s, the Inner London Education Authority had an employee called Frank Bhatti. And Frank Bhatti was given a piece or a role by the Inner London Education Authority to write a piece about the Silotes. And Frank Bhatti did a completely stupid, ignorant job. Now, every single attacker of the Silotes has done that. So for decades, I have been involved in defending the Silotes against the attacks from the Fleet Street and also from the likes of the Inner London Education Authority. There is nobody else who has been doing this. I am the one who has been doing this, defending the Silotes. Now, this is the last thing I had in my mind when I set out to see the world, if you like. But this is fact. So Dia Chakrabarti, although she is a traceable Silote, never owns up to Silot. So this is the background to Dia Chakrabarti. What she is doing here is serving the racists. So Dia Chakrabarti is doing it in a way that Trevor Terrible P-Lips doesn't do. She doesn't attack the campaigners in the way that Trevor Terrible P-Lips, the mental slave, does. Well, she doesn't do that on television either. And she is talking about building bridges. And she's talking according to the same agenda about Jordan Peterson that Peter Hitchens talked about himself, or he could speak about Rod Liddell, because Rod Liddell has been one of the kind of champions of people like Jordan Peterson or Peterson. Now, Dia Chakrabarti, when you look at her, you can see that there is an Asian female. And when she appears on the television, she is an Asian female. Now, Asian females, let's say, include people like the refugees that were massacred in the drowning, organized drowning in the Channel a few weeks ago. But she won't be talking about those victims of the massacre, the Asian victims of the massacre. And she won't be talking about the role that Churchill played in creating the 1943 genocide in Bengal. That was 4 years before the British Empire kind of wound up, 1947. So Dia Chakrabarti is the one that is given the platform by the daily buying Boris Johnson Graph. This is the other extreme from the complete and total lack of any platform given to campaigners for and anti-racism campaigners for the truth to be told by Fleet Street about the empire and about what is happening in this country. Remember, we've been talking about the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence in April 1993. And when the Blair-fronted cabal took over the government, they appointed, few years after Stephen Lawrence murder by racists, this inquiry. And the inquiry was chaired by a man called William McPherson. And William McPherson was told of evidence, given evidence to him by the various campaigners submitting the evidence about the role of the Metropolitan Police after the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And the various items of evidence submitted to the committee chaired by William McPherson made it very clear that the only reason why Stephen Lawrence's murderers, racist murderers, were not really treated as murderers by the Metropolitan Police was because the Metropolitan Police personnel involved were themselves prejudiced, racially prejudiced against the victim of the particular murder and against his family, against his parents. So instead of accepting that evidence, or instead of looking for kind of evidential corroboration for substantiating that kind of accusation made against individual police personnel, William McPherson decided to cover up and to stage a denial of racism as the motive of the behavior, behind the behavior of the police personnel. And McPherson knew what he was doing because crimes reported about racist attacks, violations against people of African and Asian origins dominate the list of rejections by the police, Metropolitan Police or any other similar comparable police force. And McPherson knew that if he accepted the allegation against racist police, then other claims against racist policing would succeed or would become credible. So McPherson wanted to diffuse the potential liability that the Metropolitan Police in the first instance were exposed to. So he came up with the idea of institutional racism. And once you use institutional instead of naming individuals perpetrating racism, you shift the burden far away from the real perpetrators of racism and into, as they say, the long grass. Because once something is described as institutional, no individual perpetrating the wrong involved can be held to account. So, what Dia Chakrabarti is doing in the Telegraph today is denying racism, is completely denying racism and turning upside down the equation. The real liability for racism and for discrimination, for prejudice, is being put upside down. And the targets of racism and targets of violations of human rights are being, in effect, held guilty of the violence and violations against them. When Boris Johnson was exposed a few years after that particular perpetration, in which he compared Muslim women wearing burqa to bank robbers, Johnson was not held to account for that. Not only was Johnson not held to account, his father, Stanley Johnson, and his sister, Rachel Johnson, came forward separately. That is, they appeared on separate platforms in the media. But they said the same sentence in defending Boris Johnson's attack on Muslim women wearing burqa looking like bank robbers. Stanley Johnson said that in that statement, Boris Johnson had not gone far enough. Rachel Johnson said that in his statement, calling Muslim women wearing burqa looking like bank robbers, Johnson had not gone far enough. Now that's the reality. This is something that happened a few years after the perpetration by Johnson of the hateful utterances against Muslim women wearing burqas looking as bank robbers. And neither Dia Chakrabarti nor any of the others who are currently denouncing what they call woke, that is, the leading meaning is anti-racists who make claims against racists are being called woke. That is a word of abuse. So Dia Chakrabarti didn't make a comment against Boris Johnson condemning Muslim women wearing burqas looking like bank robbers. So although they are saying, Dia Chakrabarti, Peter Hitchens and others, that anyone who opposes racism is actually representing a fascistic anti-free speech position. But they have been quite careful in allowing Boris Johnson to get away. So all the articles that they write because they are given the platform, not because they are correct. And the anti-racists and the people who oppose slavery, people who oppose empire, imperialism, are denied any platform. So when compared to the likes of Rod Liddell or Peter Hitchens, who have been subjected to protests by mainly student campaigners on university campuses, if they have been protested against, say, one time for their racism, then anti-racists right across the country or the community are being denied 99% of the times, and nobody in Fleet Street is saying a single word about that. I'm saying it, but nobody else is saying it, not as far as I can see. Now we shall leave that there for the time being and move on to the police as a kind of updater, let's say. Updater to the theme that I addressed about William McPherson. Staging a stunt and shifting the real attention from the real individual personal racists onto an anonymous institutional racism tag. Now, in today's Financial Times, which is currently costing £2.90 in the UK, which I paid today, is saying in a big read, in an FT big read about UK society. And it is, the main heading is, can Britain's police recover public trust? And it says accusations of misconduct and a series of flawed investigations have cast doubt on the competence of UK forces, that is, police forces. Some are experimenting with more scientific approaches and employing specialists. Now that gives the game away about this piece. This is the Financial Times. Remember, it is edited by a woman born to a Muslim family in the Lebanon. But she's far removed from an atmosphere of understanding that Muslims exist on the planet Earth. The Financial Times is as racist and as anti-Muslim and as much in denial as the other titles in Fleet Street are. So, for example, The Guardian. The Guardian has known for years that Muslims in China are being tortured and forced in concentration camps. But the Guardian doesn't publish the facts. And financial crimes in the apparently crafty piece, big read, is talking about trust, but it's not talking about racism of the police. In fact, it is talking about cases like this one, or cases that are summarized in this particular description. The Metropolitan Police in London apologized on Friday over the investigation of 4 murders in 2014 and 2015. The latest in a series of scandals to rock forces around the country. Below there is a picture. Avon and Somerset Police patrol crime hotspots in Bridgewater, part of the force's evidence-based policing strategy. And they are, in this piece, they are actually citing a Hindu named man who has been posing as a Muslim, as an expert, who is a former policeman based in Tower Hamlets. So this is a completely ill-written, ill-researched, and stupid piece by Robert Wright. It's called FTB Greed about UK society, but it's completely false and misleading. So when this is archived and decades later or centuries later, if the planet survives, people look at this, they will have only this content of this to go on. They won't have the reality told anywhere about the lies that this piece is about. And they're promoting this thing called University of Cambridge's Police Executive Program, which is described here as that this program can transform police forces' crime fighting capabilities. Nothing to do with crime fighting. It's not the technique. It's the attitude of the human being, or the personnel, police person, whoever they are, wherever they are. I'll come to that more in a minute. Let's go into the So this piece is about technique, not about the human factor involved. So where is this Babu? Because I'm trying to get the Babu first name. I'm trying to locate the first name of this Babu in this piece, and I can't find it yet. And the completely stupidly written piece ends with stupidity as the future. It allegedly quotes this Babu, who it says believes that the current crisis presents an opportunity for revaluation. But Babu warns that the changes may prove as ephemeral as they have in the past. So what's the point of writing this big read? And then it apparently quotes Babu again. It's about getting the culture of the organization to change, understanding public confidence, engaging with the community, and working more effectively in terms of partnership, he says. It's not rocket science. But that's a lie. It is rocket science. Because the police and the public are not in contact and have not been for the last few decades. And the fact that the police are not held to account as a routine makes things even worse, which is why on all the evidence objectively assessed, policing has been abolished. What is supposedly peddled as the duty or the role or the task of policing in society is not to be found in the practice where it matters. Of course, exceptions do occur, but they are unrepresentative of the real bulk of the exchanges or interactions. For example, this death of the 11-year-old child in Shadwell in Tower Hamlets on Saturday from alleged toxic fume has been followed by police attending the scene, and the communications have been made between police and members of the public and the relatives of the family and the people that are very closely involved with the family affected by this. But that is not the norm. Because in the same area, Shadwell, the same area of Shadwell where the police have attended, the Shadwell Sutton Street, and the building is called Nida House in Sutton Street, which is near the corner of Cable Street and Sutton Street, and not far from the Shadwell DLR station. There is this street, Watney Street and Watney Market. Watney Street and Watney Market are also locations for the physical presence of the largest number of young males in the area. And most of these young males, in fact all of them, with very slight minor exceptions, are Bangladeshi origin, just like the 11-year-old girl that has died on Saturday. But unlike the police engagement or response to the reports of the injuries suffered by the family, including the girl who died, unfortunately, the relationship between the police and the young males in the nearby streets is very different. It's one of silent disengagement or hostility. Now, who benefits from this lack of contacts with the police and between the police and the mainly Bangladeshi youngsters in the Shadwell area? Because not only Nida House, but the adjoining buildings. Adjoining buildings, mainly originally council buildings that have been converted away from the social kind of remit underlying the foundation several decades ago. These buildings are significantly occupied by Bangladeshi individuals and families. Shadow. This building, Nida House, is 1 minute's distance from the Bluegate Fields Primary School, which the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon visited a few years ago. The Sturgeon was completely stupid to be given the brief that Tower Hamlets had the best schools in the country, or some of the best schools in the country. She'll come to that another time. But Nicola Sturgeon was treated as if she was a target of some kind of attack. So when she came to the school, all the telephone connections around the school and around the destination were switched off or deliberately manipulated so that people trying to contact the school were unable to contact the school. What safety or security purpose did that serve? How do I know? Because I was one of the people at the time making attempts to call the school. And I couldn't get through, not because I didn't make the correct dialing or whatever, but the entire telephone networks were manipulated and stalled for security reasons to make sure that Nicola Sturgeon was not attacked. No one was going to attack her, as far as I know. But that is what happened. So Nida House is near the other buildings on the Cable Street, coming from the other end of Limehouse and linking the street, Cable Street itself, linking to the Cannon Street Road and beyond. There are residential buildings housing thousands of people, individuals and mainly families. Many of those spaces on the estates, there are several estates in the area, many of these spaces on the estates are literally given over to criminal gangs. And the police in Tower Hamlets don't take any action against the criminal gangs. If you look at the list of the cases in the local paper, so-called the East London Idiotizer, or if you search the databases for court cases concerning the criminality allowed to be perpetrated round the clock, especially during the nights, by these gangs of criminals, you will find hardly any reference, any mention of the crimes that they commit every 24 hours. These criminals take over the entire state during night time. What happens? It's a guess. Most people in the local area have stopped reporting these criminals to the local police or to the local councillors. In fact, the local councillors are part of the criminal gangs' domination because they never make any point. They never complain. How do I know? Because this particular incident, the tragedy involving this 11-year-old girl, in the accounts published online, there is a reference by name to one of the local councillors who is described as a Liberal Democrat councillor, Rabina Khan. Now, this is very rare in the sense that Rabina Khan, as a local councillor, she is one of the two councillors for Shadwell. One is her, and the other is her, within quotes, ex-colleague, both of whom were loyal members of the cabal that was fronted by Lutfur Rahman. So the other one is a shopkeeper, Harun Mia, and this one is Rabina Khan, who changed her, quote, party, so-called, and became a Liberal Democrat. So the Harun Mia has not been mentioned in the pieces that I have seen. Only Rabina Khan has been. But this is absolutely, unbelievably rare. Because Rabina Khan, in the details that she has been mentioned in connection with, says that she spent parts of 2 days with residents. She doesn't refer to voters. She doesn't refer to the community. She calls them residents. Residents is a plastic, corrupt, and disengaged word that is not representative of the speaker's willingness to identify themselves as part of. And when Rabina Khan says residents, she comes across as if she is from another plane, another kind of elevated place, not as low as the residents. And by her mere presence with the residents, she suggests that she is raising them to the level they would otherwise not be able to aspire to, let alone achieve. But the details don't really matter. The fact that she was there for 2 days don't matter either. Why? Because the real responsibility about any toxic leakage or any presence of any deadly toxic or toxin on that building or on any other building nearby, the responsibility lies with the local council. And it goes back to the question of the local Tower Hamlets Council being in partnership with the criminals. Why? Because the criminals are never prosecuted. And for years they have been running nightmare raids during the nights against thousands of local people trying to live in freedom and in peace in their flats or at the houses or homes. So within yards of the place where this unfortunate tragedy took place, Nida House, the estates are dominated by criminals. And there is no record, as I said before, of the criminals being stopped. They're not stopped, they're not caught, and they're not prosecuted. Now, anyone watching this, if you have any evidence that there have been prosecutions, that criminals have been duly dealt with, and the criminality has been significantly reduced, then please direct message this campaign and just mention the date of the actual prosecution, the place where the prosecuted offenses took place, and the action, that the penalty imposed on the criminal or criminals. Thousands of people are fed up in the area, and the local criminals council, local council, is in collusion with the criminals, and it doesn't do anything. So you extrapolate, that is, multiply that behavior and apply this behavior to other toxic estates across Tower Hamlets, in Bethnal Green, in the Poplar area, and other parts of the Limehouse and Poplar constituency, and the Bethnal Green and Bow constituency, and you find that the police supposedly in post to police for the community in Tower Hamlets, they are not doing the job that they have the power to do. And the police are increasingly, of course, out of any audit for their behavior in terms of racism. For example, the Guardian Online has published an account that we have seen during the day on Monday, that one of the convicted police persons who had abused their position and taken pictures of the two murdered sisters in North London also boasted about a kind of racist abuse of other victims. So this is in the last 12 hours, the last day, if you like. So when the financial crime says that, the financial crimes itself is in complete, absolute denial of the actual truth of what policing is about nowadays. It's not about policing. It's something else, and nobody is prepared to accept that. Not Keir Starmer, and most certainly not Boris Johnson, most certainly not Priti Patel, who is the interior minister, so-called, supposedly heading the department that actually is responsible for the police. Now, here is a piece about the news about coronavirus, and there is a piece about Boris Johnson having racistly distorted the name of this person who is clearly of Indian origin. It says that the Times caption to the picture of this person called Neil Shastri Hurst, their caption is saying that Neil Shastri Hurst suffered the indignity of having Boris Johnson get his name wrong on a campaign visit. And Neil Shastri Hast is supposed to be the candidate for the Conservatives. So they are saying that Boris Johnson went to Oswestry to watch Shastri Hurst deliver booster jobs, but blundered by calling him Neil Shastri Hughes. In recent hustings, Shastri Hurst has been asked as much about what happened to in Downing Street last December as whether local rail lines close by Dr. Beeching will reopen. And this particular candidate, Neil Shastri Hurst, declined to be interviewed by the Times. And the Times is saying that if the Liberal Democrats do reduce the Tory majority, they will be indebted to Sir Rowland Hill, an MP from the reign of Henry VIII, because Rowland Hill was famous as a principled politician, a foe to vice and a vehement character who fought corruption. He built a magnificent manor house called Salton Hall near the town of Wem. The grounds now serve as the Liberal Democrat campaign base, and it is from here that the party dreams of taking a second Tory scalp this year after winning the Chesham and Amersham by-election. Helen Morgan, the Lib Dem candidate, is leveraging local issues such as ambulance response times and farmers' frustrations with the Australia-New Zealand trade deals in the hope of improving on a third place finish behind Labour in the 2019 election. Unlike Shastri Hurst, who started ranting in the constituency shortly after being selected, Morgan 46 is a local. My sense is that the turnout won't be that great, and that there are quite a lot of demotivated conservatives, she says. Local people really do think they want somebody who is embedded in their community. While Morgan is critical of Patterson's conduct, she has not put sleaze front and center of her campaign, fearing that it could play into voters' wider sense of disillusionment with the political class. She has herself had to apologize about social media posts comparing the government and the Nazis, including one likening Priti Patel to Goebbels. I've got a history degree and I've drawn some historical comparisons, but to the extent that they caused offense, I have apologized for that. She has not apologized for the comparability between Patel and Goebbels. An unknown quantity is the performance of Reform UK, whose leader, Richard Tice, came third in Old Bexley and Sidcup. There has been no challenger to the right of the Tories in North Shropshire since 2015 when UKIP picked up over 9,000 votes. The party's candidate, that is Richard Tice's colleague, Kirsty Walmsley, is the daughter of the former leader of the Shropshire Council, and Reform UK has been buoyed by the defection of the Tory Deputy Mayor of Market Drayton. Last week's voters were having difficulty getting excited about the contest in Market Drayton. In Market Drayton, Nathan Wilson, a delicate son owner aged 47, says there has been a mixed reaction to Patterson's resignation and that he will stay at home on what will be his birthday. Rose Darlington, 72, a retired community worker and conservative voter, says she has not paid close attention to Patterson's resignation, but says she will vote Boris. In Oswestry, however, Ginny Thurston, 70, a retired marketing consultant and lifelong Tory voter, has moved away from the Conservatives and says the Prime Minister is a babbling buffoon. So upset was she by the video last week of Downing Street aides wondering how to spin the party that she may vote Labour. Malcolm Clark, 75, a retired schoolmaster and conservative voter, will either stay at home or tactically vote Lib Dem. If I had still have been head of sixth form, there would have been no Christmas party last year, he says. I would say, Boris, engage your brain. Now that's the last paragraph by George Grills of the piece Lib Dems sniff and upset as Tories win apathy vote. But according to that particular piece, and according to the trend that I have observed over the last few decades, even if the Conservatives hang on to the Shropshire seat vacated by Owen Paterson, even if they do that, it will still be a serious damage to the electoral position of the Conservatives. Because the point about Boris Johnson is that he is perceived correctly on the evidence as being a dishonest person. We shall come to that issue of trust later. So there is a cartoon in the Times today, which is actually much better than any of the articles about Johnson. This is the cartoon, and it says it's about the Downing Street quiz presided over by Johnson. Question 1, and it is attributed to Boris Johnson reading it. How the hell did we end up here? That's Boris Johnson, according to the cartoon in the Times. And the piece by Libby Parbert is celebrating hunger and poverty. We shall come to that in a minute. And the main editorial comments, there are 3 comments in the Times today, editorial comments. We shall diagnose at least the most important of the 3. Now the middle one is about child protection, and it says, as Omicron surges, every effort must be made to avoid a new lockdown of schools. And the first one is Johnson adrift. The Johnson is aimlessly floating. What is the description of that heading? Johnson is losing the confidence of his party and the public. To restore his battered authority, Johnson needs to overhaul his chaotic Downing Street operation. Notice there is no mention of the concept of fairness, of justice, of doing the right thing, of the rule of law, of the central need for accountability and democracy. So the Times fails. Although it says that Johnson is losing the confidence of his party and the public, the Times doesn't do anything to actually change things. Operational change, the Downing Street operation, without any moral mooring, any ethical orientation, any commitment to stop lying and deceiving, is not going to change anything for the better, for society. So they're concluding this comment, editorial comment, by saying that a defeat in this usually impregnable Tory stronghold, that is Shropshire South, no, Shropshire North, a defeat in this usually impregnable Tory stronghold, that is Shropshire North, would send a powerful signal that the public is losing patience with a Prime Minister who appears unwilling or unable to do his job. Well, I don't think it is a given that the Tories will be defeated at the by-election. And the reason why I say that that is not a given is because the Labour Party and the Lib Dems are not united in the narrative about most things that matter. And they have not created the moral atmosphere, either the Labour Party or the Lib Dems, that creates a compulsive kind of atmosphere. A compulsive atmosphere that demands that the Johnson fronted cabal be ousted, which is the atmosphere that must be created. Now here is the piece by Libby Parbert. I've been calling her Libby Parbert since the early 1990s, when Libby Parbert in the same Times newspaper published an opinion supporting cruelty to cats. Now here she is advocating causing deprivation to children, this criminal. So we shall read more of this bit than we originally planned. She says, A.S. Neil's Summerhill School in Suffolk has survived a century of change and anxious interference by the government. And one of the highlights in this piece says deprivation can be productive. Grapevines thrive in hard soil. So she's this Libby Parvers is a very confused, selfish, and semi kind of schooled person. She's saying in the last paragraph, the pandemic years may even have brought useful lessons about children's ability to self-start and manage time without bells, about collaboration, even some democracy in household matters, and perception of how a community's needs compare with personal comfort. Homeschooling will have taught many earlier in life than usual to understand and forgive the limitations of their parents. Deprivation can be productive as grapevines thrive in hard soil. If closed schools meant some households temporarily become miniature summer hills, for good or ill, it has at least been educative. Well, that's a banal and empty opinion. What would she say about the deprivation caused to literally hundreds of millions of children over the planet? What is productive if they die? How is being tortured productive? Which is what she said in the early 1990s when she wrote a piece in the same platforms, the Times, that cruelty to cats was justified. This is a woman who is making the growth of grapevines in hard soil the norm. Grapevines are not the norm. Most children on the planet don't know what a grapevine looks like. And she is the person that would actually happily condemn human rights. So we should go back to the piece by Diya Chakrabarti. And like Libby Parvert in the Times, the Telegraph piece by Diya Chakrabarti is endorsing, promoting a kind of elitist, exclusive model. She asks, what is it that is allowing Cambridge to resist the cancel culture when other Western universities are embracing it? The answer, according to Patterson, lies at least partially in the decentralized collegiate system of Oxford and Cambridge. The problem with a highly centralized structure is that it's amenable to capture. Now, when they use the term capture, they of course don't mean Boris Johnson or the cabal of right-wingers. But that's exactly what Johnson has done, and that's exactly what Cummings had done, and Brexiteers had done, and Cummings has already, in the last few days, justified his collusion and collaboration with Johnson by referring to the phrase Brexit done. And here is a piece in the I newspaper that hasn't appeared anywhere else as far as I can see, that Theresa Coffey, the coffee is spelled with a difference, Coffey, and the Therese is French, spelled in a French way. Staff at the Department for Work and Pensions, well, that is the official name, but our name is Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation, is the DWP. They drank alcohol and ate takeaways together late into the evening several times while COVID-19 restrictions were in place. The government department has confirmed reports in the Sunday Mirror that a core team of employees would frequently drink until the early hours of the morning and order food to the office of the Work and Pensions Secretary, to Theresa Coffey. This was during a time when office parties and hospitality events were banned under the COVID-19 regulations. The Sunday Mirror reported that during one of these occasions, Theresa Coffey handed out Christmas presents to her team. The Sunday Mirror quoted insiders saying, "There were parties all the time in the department," suggesting that it was an open secret even during full lockdown last year. They said there was a constant flow of booze in the office. The DWP confirmed there were times when alcohol was consumed in a workspace outside the cabinet minister's vital offices, but stressed it was when work was continuing past normal employment hours. Well, it doesn't matter. This should be treated as brazen breaking of the law. Now, there is no explanation as to why Dirty Digger, Boris Murdoch, Boris's ally, that is Dirty Digger, because although Dirty Digger's preferred occupant at number 10 Downing Street is Michael Gove, Dirty Digger is pragmatic enough to know that he can't just have Gove replace Johnson just like that. I'm looking for the report, if there is any in the print version of this scam about this 11-year-old girl who died on Saturday in Shadwell. Of course, the son I'm calling it for the records, has got a version of the report online about the child, 11-year-old girl who died. Yes, that is where it is, on page 23. Page 23 of this is on the 11-year-old girl who now, in the last paragraph, which we have tweeted about, it says, the Met Police said the girl's cause of death was being treated as unexplained. And then it said that is the Met Police, firefighters had found chemicals believed used for pest control. Now, we have posted that when we searched the Tower Hamlets Council's official website, we couldn't find any mention of this child's death. And we have called the council the corrupt Tower Hamlets Council. Earlier in this edition, we have said that Nida House, which is where the child contracted the fume, Nida House is very near the estate, or in the estate, which is allowed by the police and the council to be taken over by a gang of criminals. And according to people who live on the buildings, there is all night noise, shouting, threats, violence, drug taking, drinks. Things that can be heard very easily by anyone driving in the cable street, which is adjacent to the estate or estates. And there is no evidence that the police hear these noises. Imagine the noise. It is absolutely very intimidating to children and to people, and it is disturbing. And there is no evidence in the records of the Tower Hamlets Council that the criminality that goes on in that estate, or the criminality that goes on in other 20, 30 other estates across Tower Hamlets, is a concern, either for the councillors or for the council. So if you look at the actual contents of the reports about the Omicron or about the new lockdowns, you can see that in every kind of section, there are factual errors and contradictions. The errors are being committed by the newspapers themselves or by the press association, which is the source of most of the copy that the newspapers run as part of the subscription business, because they buy the copy from the press association and they just adjust the kind of texts, not even checking the contents. They adjust the text and they run the stories without checking the spelling, without checking the numbers, without checking the accuracy or the suitability of anything that they publish. So, for example, they're writing this one. The Doomstar's prediction of 75,000 Omicron deaths by May called into question. Now, this is the kind of things that must be published more widely. I mean, how does anyone know that 75,000 people will die? So, this is an example of the serious, alarming estimate made by the London School. What is it called? The London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And this is what the piece is diagnosing and kind of disposing of. So let's see if this paper has got a piece about this child in Shardwell. And we shall come to the role of the council in a minute about this particular tragedy. And this is the piece that I referred to about the Nick Timothy and Theresa May. This is the kind of version of the Daily Mail, which is talking about Operation Revenge, which is, what do they explain in their subheading? This is the one that is written by Andrew Pierce, and we'll come to talking more about Andrew Pierce in a minute. How Theresa, Dom, and a motley crew of Remainers, whose careers were torpedoed by Brexit, have spent the past week trying to bring down Boris. Now, Andrew Pierce is a supporter of massacres and genocides and is a lifelong careerist, opportunistic, racist liar. For almost 3 years, if not longer, he appeared along with Michael Gove, who was still working for the Dirty Digger Murdoch's Times and was not an MP as far as I can recall, but that can be changed, checked, and we can update on the checked outcome. So Andrew Pierce and Michael Gove appeared regularly on the BBC television slot called Dateline London. And they fiercely supported the massacres and genocidal attacks on the Afghans and the Iraqis by the American and the British military. And the BBC allowed that. And there was no objection to this propaganda for murder, massacre, and genocide from any of the Fleet Street papers whatsoever. And as far as I can recall, again, this is subject to checking, and if the fact checks reveal a different version than I am saying, then that different version, accurate version, will be posted online as updater. But essentially, Andrew Pierce is literally a warmonger. He's not the only warmonger, because the other parts, other outlets in Fleet Street have allowed him to behave as warmonger and to call for murders and massacres. Remember whose murders and whose massacres he was advocating. Of course, the Iraqis and the Afghans are essentially absolutely Muslims. I mean, the number of non-Muslims like the Yazidis in the context of Iraq numerically is much smaller. So this is the kind of person that is writing in the Daily Mail, and he's a regular kind of writer. Andrew Pierce writes regularly, and he writes racistly. So what we have in the context of this is the robbery there. They're calling it robbery. This is literally a nihilistic denial of the right for anyone to compete against any British sport person or sportsman or woman and defeat any British competitor. Because if a competitor who is not British has the audacity, according to the Fleet Street races, to really beat a British challenger, then that is not they are defeating the British challenger, but they are committing a crime, which is what the Fleet Street papers of Monday, the 13th of December 2021, are calling what happened in the Gulf. It says Formula One could be set for a messy legal battle after Mercedes vowed last night to appeal against the result of a chaotic season ending Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and have Lewis Hamilton installed as world champion instead of Red Bull's race winner Max Verstappen. So they're saying that Red Bull winner Max Verstappen is a criminal. And this is not just in the daily buying Boris Johnson graph. That is the line that is taken by all the Fleet Street papers. So this is the Financial Times piece that actually refers the piece headline or headed, "Can Britain's police recover public trust?" And this is byline to Robert Wright. It says, "I'm social policy correspondent for the Financial Times and formerly a public policy, political, transport and US industry correspondent, but these views are mine." So these are the views that he has. So it's Dal Babu. The piece that I looked for, Dal Babu, in is called "Can Britain's Police Recover Public Trust?" And the Babu is the one that is referred to in the last paragraph, but Dal Babu is not. So Dal Babu is somewhere sunk in the main body of the piece, which I have yet to find, because Dal is a short word, DAL. So, but I'm very interested in the appearance of Dal Babu, because Dal Babu is mentioned as a former commander. Let's see where this Wright says about Dal Babu. So this Dal Babu has been surfacing in too many places, and I have absolutely no recollection of this Dal Babu taking part in anything about the community anywhere in the last 40 years. And he's described by The Guardian as well as a former chief superintendent in the Metropolitan Police. And Dal Babu is given an OBE. And Dal Babu appears in Fleet Street coverages about the Stephen Port, the massacre criminal. And Dal Babu's name appears under the piece headed, "The Stephen Port Scandal is Another Betrayal of Public Trust." This is a piece in The Guardian, and it appears that it's a Guardian piece on the 10th of December, Friday, and actually byline to Dal Babu himself. Now, there is no reference anywhere attributable to Dal Babu about the criminals that are allowed to dominate the states across Tower Hamlets. But Dal Babu has been able to cultivate himself into a niche corner in The Guardian and the likes, based on his ethnicity, alleged ethnicity links. In fact, in the last 5 years or so, he has more than once surfaced as being mentioned as being very close to the family of Shamima Begum, one of the Bethnal Green School girls. How on earth has this policeman, ex-policeman, been allowed to do a career while he has absolutely no traceable involvement in the overall approach to all the major aspects of policing in this country that affects and can be linked to the rights and the role of the ordinary people in the African and Asian community? Most certainly not in Tower Hamlets. So who is placing this Dal Babu and promoting him as somebody that is not only aware of general issues, but is painted as a representative de facto of the views of the so-called family of Shamima Begum? I say so-called because according to the reports that have been consistently published, the biological father of Shamima Begum lives in Bangladesh, and there is no evidence of his, that is Dal Babu's, independent evidential basis for claiming any connection with the rest of Shamima Begum's biological family. It's like this so-called documentary that has been allegedly made and given publicity to by a very mysterious former soldier who seems to be based in Glasgow or somewhere else in Edinburgh, or in Edinburgh or Scotland, who has been able to get access to Shamima Begum inside Syria and has been allowed to record documentary television program which has got very contradictory and dangerous contents, because in more than one particular kind of segment or instance, this so-called ex-British soldier, retails the claim by Shamima Begum's so-called husband that he thinks that Shamima Begum was paid, and he makes, according to that publicity line, various other she made selfish, misleading, untruthful assertions. And then few months after that, there surfaces the same source, that is that so-called former soldier, allegedly retailing the alleged claim by Shamima Begum's so-called husband that they had a wonderful time together and that he wishes that they could get together again or something. What I'm saying is that while Tower Hamlets Council, the local council of these girls when they were children, failed or neglected or chose to ignore its various safeguarding children duties, and it still is neglecting to carry out the compensatory, remedial duties that it should be made to carry out to compensate these girls for their negligence when they needed support. Somebody is using this strange ex-soldier. That is a giveaway. Ex-soldier means that he is working for the state. And the state is interrogating Shamima Begum under the guise of this so-called documentary. That's what is happening. Entire Armed Council remains silent about the So here is the Sun's kind of claim that Hamilton was robbed by the rival who won the race. And there are absolutely pages and pages of contradictions and lies. Now, the behavior of licensed law traders is not explained or detailed in Private Lie, which runs a token legal page or column. But there is a kind of remark in passing, a kind of obiter dicta by this writer, who is not named as such, but the importance I shall explain in a minute. Okay, this is the piece that the Private Lie says at page 42 under the section Trials and Tribulations. And there are pictures of two women. One is a woman called Holmes, Elizabeth Holmes, and the other one is Ghislaine Maxwell, of course. But this is the bit that I want to focus on. Defense lawyers prefer clients not to take that risk unless there is no alternative. That is to say, cross-examination, facing cross-examination by testifying. Now, this issue of cross-examination and giving evidence by a party in any case in a court is at the center of our very detailed evidential investigative piece or pieces against a judge in the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court. A judge, a deputy district judge, a woman solicitor called Judith Goodman. And before that, in a chain of conspiracy that were perpetrated by Judith Goodman and Henrietta Manners during 2011. And one of the participants in the racistly conceived criminal sabotage is a criminal racist called Edward Fitzpatrick. And in 2011, 2 years before she was given the solicitor's practicing license, a woman called Lucie, Lucie Green. Lucie Green allegedly instructed this racist criminal liar, Edward Fitzpatrick. And the racist criminal, sitting as the deputy district judge at the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court, was Judith Goodman. And the date, 10th of November 2011, must have been fixed by the gang of criminals at this court, including Henrietta Manners, who was in post as a district judge. Now, Edward Fitzpatrick is the criminal who actually did the particular central crime in the proceedings. But all of these will be detailed and updated in due course, not in this particular edition because of the length needed. The central point is that asking a protagonist, either a defendant or a claimant, to do anything before the so-called judge needs to be as a result of agreement between the so-called client and the so-called licensed law trader, who is the criminal racist liar Edward Fitzpatrick of the Garden Court chambers in the Lincoln's Inn. If there is lack of confidence or lack of trust by the public in the police, then there is absolutely no basis factually to make any claim that licensed law traders, either barristers or solicitors, have got any claim to be trusted by the public. We shall continue in due course on that and other issues.